Oh yes, I remember. So long ago. It's been a long time. Oh, hello. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Christopher Walken. You know, the one who threatens people with a soldering iron. You know, you're talking about a guy wrong, that's the wrong tone. Do it again, I'll stab you in the face with a soldering iron. Is that right? Let me ask you something. Do your mother sew? Boom! Get in and saw that! Anyway, ever since I told the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow a long time ago, and since this is October, I talked to Mr. Multi-Voice Reviewer if I could show up and talk about the franchises himself. Mr. Multi-Voice Reviewer, he was delighted to have me talking about the franchise among Sleepy Hollow. Since I heard this town in Vivi, Indiana, are having some kind of a Sleepy Hollow thing going on here, where people are gonna be doing some arts and crafts and serving some food and a lot of things out there. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm excited to be there. And of course, I also heard that sooner or later, there's going to be another Sleepy Hollow going on in town, and Multi-Voice Reviewer, he's going to play Ichabod Crane. So, he's going to dress old-fashioned, telling the story, acting like a teacher, until the Headless Horseman shows up and scares the living daylights out of him. Of course, I don't know why he's using his impression of Goofy. Maybe it's because he knows the story so much. I mean, he remembers the story so much, the only voice pops into his head is Goofy, because the way he looks, he does look Goofy to me, if you pay attention to the story. But of course, enough about what's going on in town. And if some of you remember me telling the story of the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow, I talked to Mr. Multi-Voice Reviewer to put a link on the bottom, so you guys can stop this video and check it out on the bottom. Hear me talk about the story of Sleepy Hollow. I mean, come on. I mean, if you are brave enough to hear me telling you about Sleepy Hollow, you should go to that link instead. But instead, you want to know about the franchise about it. Let's get to it, shall we? Gotta say, I look good. Anyway, before I tell you about the franchise of Sleepy Hollow, first, a little history is in order. Oh, one more thing Mr. Multi-Voice told me to tell you folks. Happy Halloween, and welcome for the days. Multi-Voice-Oween. Multi-Voice-Oween. The time where the Multi-Voice Reviewer is no longer telling stories, but decided to review Halloween themes. Everything it's Halloween based, and this will be the first. Anyway, back to the story, shall we? I'm reviewing Sleepy Hollow, not the crow. That crow there is such a mook. Washington Irving loved the story so much, he arrived all the way to New York back in the old century. And he roamed around in the graveyard with all the historical names. And that's what gave him an inspiration of, oh yeah, Washington Irving was born back in 1783. Well, that was pretty old. So I guess he wouldn't last that longer. Anyway, he loved this town called Sleepy Hollow. And he decided to write a story. Since there was a headstone. You know, instead of just telling you about it, how about I show you some of the areas of Sleepy Hollow? Shall we? Because I know some of you historical people would like it if I show you Sleepy Hollow itself. This here is a place called Sleepy Hollow. And the town's been around in 1640. That's how the town started. Now, if you ever go to Sleepy Hollow, it's next to New York. And there's a colonial house where you see all the people dressed up in old-fashioned clothing and reenact. And of course, they have a guy dressing up as the Headless Horseman. You know, I kind of wonder, I would make a very dang good Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow one of these days. And here is a sign talks about the bridge. Not bad. Anyway, they say if you ever go to Sleepy Hollow's ancient historical cemetery, you can find a couple of headstones of characters from the book. Like Brom Bones and Katrina Van Tassel, Ichabod Crane, Baltus Van Tassel. And of course, you can find the headstone of the Headless Soldier, the guy who rumored to be the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. My, how spooky it is. Anyway, since he heard a lot of stories about headless men who turns into ghosts, that's when he got up the idea of writing his book of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And it became an all-time classic. And some people would say that the Headless Horseman should be one of the icons of Halloween, like Santa Claus. Now, there are a lot of adaptations of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Lots. I mean, there were some made back in the silent era, before movies decided to have some music and sound, and before they went to color. But anyway, you can find a couple of a public domain silent films of Sleepy Hollow. Until when the talkies came about, Disney themselves decided to get themselves involved with the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And therefore, they created the most memorable Legend of Sleepy Hollow ever made. And this one was more of an adaptation of the book. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, The Adventure of Ichabod Crane. Now, the only voice actor, the narrator, and the voice, and the guy who gives the voice, is none other than the legendary actor himself and dancer, Bing Crosby. Wait a minute, Fred Astaire was a dancer. Bing Crosby was a crooner. You know, ba 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 boo. That's a crooner. Yeah. And then Warner Brothers themselves decided to make their own version. And this here was their own version of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But if you ask me, I think the Disney was a lot better adaptation. but this one's very memorable. And then when colored movie came about, a lot of people have been making their own versions, you know. A lot. And the one everybody seemed to like the most, that's pretty much close to the adaptation, except they have a happy ending where it turns out Ichabod Crane is not as bad as everybody else's thought. This one was their own adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, starring Jeff Goldblum. And everybody know that actor. Ever since The Fly and Jurassic Park, he becoming very memorable. Now, there was a rumor, but I can't find it anywhere. It's not even in the public domain. But that lovely actress who goes by the name of Shirley Temple, who's been a child star for a long time. But when she became a full-grown lady, she decided to make a series of fairy tale stories. It's been around through centuries. And Shirley Temple herself made her version of The Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow, starring Shirley Temple herself as Katrina. What a woman, that Shirley. And then there was another one called American Tall Tale of Legends, Shelley Duvall Presents. And this one had Ed Begley Jr. as Ichabod Crane. And this is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, starring Ed Begley Jr. Presented by Shelley Duvall. You know her, she played Olive in Popeye. And also played the wife in The Shining. And of course, if you remember those kids series called Wishbone, where Wishbone always had the same situation as the characters in the story, that he decided to make his own version of all the stories while he plays a character. This here is the Wishbone version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, starring Wishbone himself as Ichabod Crane. I thought people say that Ichabod Crane's supposed to look more like a scarecrow, not a dog. Duh. Now, of course, there were some independent films that got nothing to do with the story. I mean, there was one called The Headless Horseman, where it has nothing to do with Sleepy Hollow. But this one, they used the name, but the premise was more like a slasher film. And this one is called Sleepy Hollow High. Not exactly a good slasher film, because everybody knows every slasher films are so cliche. And then let's get to the one everybody's always been waiting for. When the legendary Tim Burton decided to make his own version of Sleepy Hollow, except he's not basing it from Washington Irving. This one, he based it on himself. This is like his version of the Hammer version of Sleepy Hollow, where the blood looks kind of bright and orangey instead of dark, and always have such gothic and wacky. I mean, Hammer have their own style, you know? It was macabre, gothic, rich, silly. I mean, it has everything. Until they stopped making horror films in the early 80s. But Tim Burton loved the Hammer films so much. Therefore, he made this version. Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. Oh, And here's me as the Headless Horseman. Ah! Ah! Seriously, I didn't have any dialogue. All I did is just go, ah! 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 And of course, don't forget the time when I picked up Miranda Richardson in front of me, and then I give her a big kiss, with blood coming out of her mouth. I love the taste of blood in my mouth. So bloody. Yeah, baby. I'm gonna, do it or what? Where did that come from? Ugh. Anyway, this one here is a really good movie. You can enjoy it every Halloween if you like, because it is very memorable and very silly. Seeing old Johnny Depp being Ichabod Crane, except this time he's not a school teacher, he's a constable. And Brom Bones gets killed because he was so driven to kill the Headless Horseman, and Christina Ricci playing Katrina. Well, at least Ichabod can find somebody to save in this story. And then after that movie was made in theaters, Hallmark themselves decided to make their own version, except more to the Washington Irving story. And therefore, Hallmark created their version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow from Hallmark. Now, not many people like Hallmark because they're so like Lifetime original drama movies. But sometimes Hallmark do make some interesting other movies. So I cannot blame them all the time. It's Lifetime I don't like. And then all of a sudden, they decided to make a brand new Headless Horseman, a Sleepy Hollow cartoon. Except this one takes a different story, where there is a descendant of Ichabod Crane who remembers his ancestor, Ichabod, who is a coward. And he's trying to prove himself that he's not a coward anymore, while he's being bullied by a descendant of Brom Bones and meets a girl who's a descendant of Katrina. And this one, and of course this time somebody stole the pumpkin, a sacred haunting pumpkin, that it released the Headless Horseman himself, creating havoc of Sleepy Hollow. And this one is called The Haunted Pumpkin of Sleepy Hollow. And then recently they decided to make a TV series based from the legend. So therefore they decided to create something that is a little bit like the Tim Burton movie, but make it more dramatic and serious. And it has a lot of conspiracy theories involved. Like, for instance, Ichabod Crane became a soldier instead of a school teacher by George Washington himself, and the Headless Horseman himself became one of the 4 horsemen of apocalypse. And it turns out that the horseman himself was Ichabod's friend, Brom Bones, who all of a sudden sold his soul to the devil himself to become one of the horsemen. But of course, Ichabod cut off his head. But he came back from the grave years later. And Ichabod fell in love with Katrina, who turns out to be a witch. So now, this Ichabod Crane, he woke up during his slumber after all those years, since the Headless Horseman risen from his grave and killed the sheriff. And the sheriff had a deputy who knows these weird things are happening, even though she was very skeptic, because she noticed all these strange things happening to her when she was a little kid. But she refused to believe it. But her sister, she believes it. Now, I don't know how many seasons has it lasted, but but I have the first season of the DVD. Sleepy Hollow. Well, it has a lot of conspiracies. And here's Ichabod Crane and that deputy who decided to team up with him. And that nightmarish vision of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. And I have to say, what a twist does this series have. All the stories and everything. It's unforgettable. I mean, this Headless Horseman, he's unfreaking believable. Sadly, not many people never thought much on doing video games of Sleepy Hollow until they made this one, which is more like a I Spy kind of game where you're supposed to find certain items and put them together to solve a puzzle. And it's called Sleepy Hollow Mystery Legends. And this is the only video game they made of Sleepy Hollow, where you just solve a puzzle and mystery in order to figure out what's going on here. Yeah. Well, this is Christopher Walken telling you, if you like this review, but if you ask me, I think it needs more cowbell. I gotta have more cowbell, baby. So, for those of you who likes this review, please leave a comment down below, hit like, and subscribe for more videos. And more of Multi-Voice-Oween will be coming soon. And Multi-Voice Reviewer is gonna be there to review it. And if you don't like it, how would you like it to be a human shish kebab in one of my final penal institutions? So, you people, are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening? Listen. Jelly donut. Jelly donut. Goodbye.